Hello and welcome to your Excel tutorial with Dave. So today we're going to talk about two different methods of creating an email list from a list of emails. Perhaps it's a list of customers, perhaps it's a list of personnel. Regardless, it will work the same way. And we're going to go through a non-technical method and then a little bit more technical method. And I want to talk about a little bit of what can be more powerful in that technical method. So first, we're going to go through the non-technical method. Basically, we're just going to create this email list with this list of data. The first thing we want to do is we want to preserve this data. So I've got to get rid of these records where I don't actually have an email address. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to copy this sheet, and I'm going to create a copy so that I can preserve my data set, but I can actually manipulate it and do what I need it done for this particular method. So I get rid of everything that's blank. In a list like this, you'd probably use a filter if you had one that was fairly sizable. Thankfully, this one is not large. So the first record you're going to initialize. It's not quite the same as the rest, so it's just going to be equals and then the email address. So it brings it forward. You can copy and paste for this one as well. I like this method just because sometimes I accidentally click those email address links, which is just silly of me. With the second one, you're actually going to apply the logic that's going to build the rest of the list. So the first thing we want to do is we want to grab all of the email addresses that we've already combined, which at this point is just one. So we're going to grab that email address, and then what we're going to do is we're going to add to this. So we're adding to this by using the ampersand. And then we need a string, so I want to use the semicolon format that emails typically have. The emails typically use between other emails. And so it's quote, semicolon, and I'm going to use a space just so it's more visually appealing, although not necessary for most email programs. And then another ampersand because we're not done yet. So what I've done is I've grabbed all the other email addresses, I put a semicolon in between that, and now I'm going to select the current email address. So that's it. Now I have the first and I have the second. Now you can use the fill handle for this and just double click. To apply that logic down, what you'll notice is now we have the third email address on there as well, and this would work all the way down whatever list you may have, or you can just click the fill handle and drag it. This seems to be a preferred method for folks in my experience. But now what I would do is I would copy this. Let me go ahead and show you Notepad. So I like to use Notepad for my copy and paste as a mid-step. So this removes any extraneous formatting. Like you can tell here, my cursor is down at the next line, so there's an extra line break in there. I can get rid of that line break and then copy it from here and paste it into the email program. Not always necessary for emails in particular, but when you're using this method to do other things, this can be somewhat important to note. So that's the non-technical version. Now it's everything's ready to just copy and paste right into the to line, right into the CC line. However you want to build that. The next is just a little bit more technical. This method is going to utilize Visual Basic for applications, but one of the big benefits is that you don't have to manipulate your data source, and you can create it so that this works repetitively over time, despite changes in this list. So we're going to go to the View menu, and then into Macros. Here, let me make sure this is displaying on the screen. It is not. So here, there's actually, it comes up with a box. Let me see if I can grab that. And there we are. And there. Okay. Sorry about that. It's been a fight. So what you see is I've already got two macros defined. They're subroutines. So what we're going to do just to open the editor, new subroutine here, and then I want to hit create. What that does is it opens up this editor. So the editor already has code in it, but you'll notice down here at the bottom we have that new sub. We don't really need this. We don't really want this. That just gave us an opening to the code. So this is everything that's going to run. This is I've taken out all the comments and all the spacing, which we'll get into. But this is literally it, and it will continue to work as this list grows longer and longer. And you won't need to modify much or anything, hopefully. So here it is with the comments. Everything in green is something that when you run this, the computer throws it away. It's not for the computer. This is for anybody looking, reading, or interacting with your code. So what we have up here are variables. Variables you use more than once, or when you update a variable, it then updates consistently everywhere, and that's the important part. So we've declare in memory, so we're making space for a sheet, and we're going to make that a worksheet. We're making space for a range, and we're calling that a range. This is the type of variable it is. So, and then we're making space for an email list, and we're defining that as a string. Now, we've told the computer to make room for it, but now we have to actually define what those are. So the sheet, we want to set the sheet to be the active sheet. This will work in the context, especially when with the button method. Then you also want to set the row as this range. So we've defined it as a range, not a number, not an integer. So we want to give it the sheet range C2, because as you can see, our emails don't start until the second row. We've got a header there that we don't need to worry with, and through C, because we're going to stay right in that column. But I could give it the number 6. I want it to go to the 6th row. That's true. But instead, as I add records to this, I don't want to have to go back to my code. So I'm going to tell it to look at the sheet, look into the rows, and count those rows. So it's going to give us the final row of this spreadsheet. So anything that's been activated, even if it doesn't have information in it, it'll continue to go down. So if I type something in here and then clear the contents, it'll go right down to 15 each time. So this will update automatically as you enter records, so that you don't have to modify your code. It will just continue to work. This email list is the variable that's going to change as the macro runs. This is really our result. This is what we want. So right now I'm telling it, well, that's blank. So I've given it 2 quotation marks right next to each other. There's no space or anything in here. So it's empty. It's an empty string. But now what we have to do is called a loop. We want to look through every single cell in this range. So I don't want to just look at one. I don't want to look at the range in whole. I want it to look at each individual cell. So this is a type of loop, for each. And then this goes all the way down to next. So everything between for each and next is part of the loop. It's going to continue, and it's going to happen consistently for each cell. So for each read row in rows, we want to do this procedure. So now this is only one if statement, and I'm asking a question. Does this row hold an email address? The way that I determine that is, in this case, because I understand the rules of this data set, is the @ symbol. So if all the way through end if only occurs if this is true. So if this becomes true, this logical evaluation, if this is true, it's going to go through and it's going to do this, which is just one line. Because again, it throws away the green text. It's going to throw away everything but this one line, and it's going to do this. Then it's going to leave the if statement. Then it's going to go to the next item. So that's why it's a loop, because it'll continue to go through each one. So if it's false, it skips all this in the middle and goes right to the next item anyway. So my question, does this row hold an email address? Well, I want you to test the string that's inside the cell. I want you to start at the first character, and I want you to look at the information in the read row. The currently being read row, I call the read row. And what I want you to look for is I want you to look for this string. Just give me an @ symbol. If it contains one or more @ symbols, I'm going to assume it's an email address. And if it contains 2 or more, I'm going to assume that those are formatted appropriately. So I'm not going to check for that in this particular example, but you can. So as long as this returns greater than 0, so what it's doing here is it's counting how many times it finds @. So if it's 1 or more, I want to keep it. So I want it to go and do this. We've verified, now that we're in here, being in here anywhere, means that we've verified that the @ symbol exists in the cell. So now we want to add the contents of that cell into our email list. So that's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Email list equals the current email list. And then I want to add that same semicolon and space. And then I'm going to add the contents of that read row. If you've caught it already, kudos. what this is going to do is that blank email list in the very beginning, it's going to feed us a semicolon and a space before it ever adds the first email address. The rest of the time it'll work appropriately, but that is an interesting issue. So we could check here if that email address is the first of all the list or if it's not the first of all the list. The reason I'm not doing that here, and I'm instead handling it in a different spot of the code, is that it's then going to evaluate whether the email address it's about to add is the first one every single iteration of this loop. I don't want it to do that. That really can add up and make your macros take a lot more time. So we're gonna move on with this. So this builds each time. So the first time it gives you the semicolon email address. The second time it gives you the semicolon email address. Third time semicolon email address. Those other two semicolons are fine. I want those there. But the first one we don't want. And then finally, eventually it will reach the end. So there are not going to be any more readable rows in our rows variable. And it's going to move on. It's going to move to the next thing. And what we're going to do now is, well, we've got this list all built up. We've got to put it somewhere. So what I'm doing is I'm taking it and I'm putting it on the sheet. And this is the definition for cell in H2. And I'm going to address the issue now of that leading semicolon. So we could just say email list. We're going to get that nasty semicolon in the front, but who cares? It's not a big deal. Well, it's easy enough to go ahead and pull the right-hand side of that string. So in this case, it's going to count from right to left, and it's going to bring back the string that you tell it to. So I want it to take the whole email list, because that's what I want. Look at the email list, and I want you to give me all of the cells from the right to the left. I want you to give me all the cells. This is a number, the length of email list. This counts how many characters are in it. Except I don't want those first two characters. I don't want the semicolon and the space. So I'm subtracting 2 from that number. And what you're going to end up with is you're going to start immediately at the first email address, and then you're going to go through the remainder of the list. All right, so let's go ahead and run this and see how it goes. So if I hit run, you'll see behind here that it's doing something. Now you'll see that update. So let me go ahead and get rid of the Visual Basic window. So now what we have is this information. Same thing, same result as the non-technical version, except this is a little bit more scalable. So you'll notice that it's the exact same 3 email addresses as before, and I've given it a little button so that I can continuously do this. So here you can assign a macro. What I've done is it's here in List Builder. So what it's going to do is it's going to run List Builder every time I push this button. But now what do I have? I have JQ here. John Q public here is going to be q at q.com, right? Now I have an extra email address, and when I hit get emails, it runs. It's taken an awful long time because I've got a lot of things open, but here are those list of email addresses, and q at q.com is updated. Same kind of story. I can add here and get rid of this email address. Joe Doe is no longer the email address for John Doe, and we've gone full name. So John Doe at thiscompany.com. Well, forget this Joe Doe. I just update this, and now it's John Doe. I hope that makes sense. But if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. I'll do my best to get back to you with a response or an answer. And otherwise, have a wonderful day. Thank you.